Exodus 22:25 states, "If you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not be like a moneylender, and charge him no interest." Much of the fate of Jews in the Middle Ages can be attributed to this one passage of the Bible. Christians and Jews interpreted this passage to mean that they could not charge interest between their co-religionists when loaning them money. Thus, the extreme minority status of Jews allowed them to lend money to most of the population, which made them very useful for an economy. And of course we're talking about medieval Europe here, as you may have guessed by the title. Kings held Jews in a special status as their property, and used the Jews to access a reliable source of cash money, rather than raw materials and products from farms, fisheries, etc., which is most of the taxes that they levied. Regardless, during the High Middle Ages, public perception of the Jews radicalized, despite their safeguarding by the papacy, the high-ranking parts of the Catholic Church, medieval Catholic Church, which was extremely powerful, of course, so the Pope, essentially, and special status under the king that they had because of this economic benefit. Gradually, the Church walked back its stance of tolerance, however, and influenced the King of England to create the right climate for events like the Expulsion of 1290. And this is one of many expulsions that happened, which is why I say events plural. Okay. But we're going to focus on this one, because it's what I researched. Okay, before we go on, just to make some things a little bit more clear, here's a couple facts about Jews in medieval times. Okay. They've been in England since William the Conqueror took the throne in 1066. Yeah, so basically as soon as that happened, there were some Jews with him, I believe. And ever since then, the Jewish population gradually grew. It took a little while for there to be a significant amount, but it grew over time. I'm constantly mentioning in this piece of writing about how they live an urban life, and one of the reasons this is, partly because they need to be near the authority of the king, because of what I've already been saying. I assume I'm going to put this in after the intro paragraph. But it's also for religious reasons. There's such thing as a mikveh, which is a bath used for the purpose of ritual immersion in Judaism to achieve ritual purity. And you need a special kind of stone building for this, normally. And women have to do this every time they go on their period, I believe. So, because of reasons like this, it's more practical for them to live in urban areas. As well as that, there's lots of other situational things, like they're near the authority of the king. A lot of them were moneylenders. That's not just a stereotypical thing. So, I mean, obviously you want to be in urban areas for that. And the ones that weren't moneylenders would ply sort of specialised trades like jewellery, stuff like that. Which, all this sounds very stereotypical, but it sounds stereotypical to you now because you live after the Middle Ages, and you live in the ripples of these events that have already happened. Okay, so I think that should clear up a few of the things that I seem to be assuming that you know in this. So essentially the upshot of that is that they would live together in a certain part of the town that would often be walled, and they would have all their religious buildings, and that would be like their quarter where you would go if you needed a loan or whatever. So there you go. So already as a baseline from that, you can see how when these people are lending money and you're not allowed to charge interest, and they are, just as a baseline, and they're living in this gated community and stuff, you can see how for the common people there's already a certain element of suspicion there, especially when you add to that the wealth that these people have. So here I'm trying to answer the question of what caused this expulsion to happen at this time. What was the build-up to it? Okay, so please enjoy. I hope it's not too autistic. I think I've targeted one of the key confusions that might happen here, and I'll link a video of like this Jewish professor explaining some stuff about Jews in medieval Europe. should give you a bit more background if you want to know it. And, yeah, please enjoy. Hopefully you can make sense of it. Much of the view of Jews in medieval England and the rest of Christendom was bound up in faith. The early church and the Roman emperors that ruled over them were rather sympathetic to the Jews, and many early theologians believed that they occupied a special place in the history and the story of Christian salvation. Saint Augustine of Hippo, who was a North African theologian, born and died in what is now Algeria, but used to be Numidia. He was around at the end of antiquity, and he defended Jews to a point, although he was rather hardline on them. He interpreted Psalm 59's line, "Slay them not, lest my people forget," as applicable to the Jews. He thought they would be helpful to keep alive as a kind of relic and monument to the truth of Christianity as he perceived it. He associated the Jews with Cain, a sinner who murdered his brother and lied to God in Old Testament mythology. He believed that it was clear the Jews had been dispersed across the world and robbed of their homeland as a divine punishment for refusing Christianity. And if you didn't know, they are dispersed at this point because during the Roman Empire they revolted a lot against the Romans, and essentially after one of these, they revolted multiple times, and then the Romans just decided to absolutely fuck them up and burn down the famous Temple of Jerusalem and just exiled them, basically. And that's how we arrived at the situation we have up until the Second World War, where they are a diaspora with no nation. Despite his disapproval of the Jews, it's interesting to note that his ill will was reserved for the actual practices of Judaism, not ethnic Jews. As he states, "Only when a Jew comes over to Christ, he is no longer Cain." This zeal to convert the Jews, coupled with a commitment to non-violence towards them, balanced against a recognition of their sin and deserving of their lot, was typical of much of the Middle Ages. This school of thought allowed the Jews to survive through the Middle Ages as a distinct ethnic and religious group, maintaining their way of life to the modern day. Nonetheless, huge theological backing to the otherness of the Jews and their sinful nature also guaranteed their position at the mercy of events like the Edict of Expulsion, with little to no public support forthcoming. The first well-documented sign of strain against this policy, or divergence from this trend that involved the English, was perhaps the massacre of Jews in the Rhineland at the beginning of the First Crusade. During one of these episodes, a company of zealous volunteers, including some Englishmen, besieged the Jews of Mainz, not sure how to pronounce that, inside the palace of the bishop, whom the Jews had bribed for protection, as well as Emico, the leader of the Crusader force, but without effect, who he essentially just took the money and then carried on leading his mob to kill them, and killed them. Interestingly, the Crusaders and the opportunists who accompanied them from the local area also wished to kill the bishop for speaking favourably of the Jews in their defence, so he fled with his men. Here we can see the potential influence of the Crusades upon the psychology of Christendom at the time. Perhaps Augustine's policy of non-violence and limited tolerance had worn thin after the hysteria created by the loss of huge swathes of Christian lands to infidels, and the warlike preaching that surrounded Pope Urban II's violent reaction to this. Jews could have been similar to Muslims in the mind of the 11th century Englishman, and, broadly 11th century European Christian, knowing them to be originally from somewhere in the East, and both being non-pagan, monotheist heretics. Additionally, we must not leave out the economic motivation for attacks like that. As I have touched upon already, the Jews were often wealthy and usually lived together in walled ghettos, so this is a great raiding target for opportunists willing to take advantage of the massed strength that they wield, and the great furious religious fervour in the air. So I'm saying, although it's walled, you know where it is, because it's got a massive wall around it, you know that's the Jewish quarter, you know there's going to be some amount of wealth there, and if you have a massive mob, it doesn't matter that it's walled, you're going to get in there. Regardless, this is one sign of how the theological arguments for the preservation of the Jews given at the highest echelons of the papacy and intellectual sphere, were not taken up by the general populace. The backing of this bishop did not save them. Instead, they turned their lust for violence on the bishop himself. Granted, this is a outlying event, but this shows what is possible. These are the things that are playing on people's minds. Many folkloric beliefs around the Jews developed by the High Middle Ages, ritual murder being one of them. A group who were technically heretics, keeping to themselves with a large amount of wealth and free time, as they did not labour in the fields, they did various other urban jobs, which I will sort of get a bit more into later on, were very suspicious to the medieval mind. Horror stories of Jews kidnapping Christians and subjecting them to ritual stigmatic murder stoked the flames of the already present anti-Jewish feeling in Europe. It was believed that Jews would select young boys for these murders as they were innocent, to better imitate Christ. And obviously this comes from the theological idea of they are opposed to Christianity, so they hate Jesus, so they and they care about it this much that they would recreate the crucifixion, essentially. The earliest surviving report of a murder like this occurs in Norwich, in England, in about 1144. The body of a young boy named William was found after dying a violent death, and it became widely believed that he had been ritually butchered in a mock crucifixion. I guess he had some wounds that were that were quite stigmatic in appearance, let's say. So the theory grew from there. Furthering the significance of the event, the boy was later canonized as a saint for his martyrdom. After this case of blood libel, many other high-profile cases were recorded across Europe, including shortly after this one, in 1147, near Mainz, the town in which the massacre occurred at the start of the First Crusade that I've just been talking about. The accusations continued even into the 20th century, despite Pope Gregory X denouncing the idea in his statement in 1272. Gavin Languire traces back to this moment as the beginning of modern radical anti-Semitism, as opposed to the normal anti-Jew feeling the medieval Christendom had previously felt, due to religious differences. So he sees this as a step over from religious difference to, something that's taking up its own folklore, if you know what I mean. In the massacre of Jews in York, we see a continuation of the themes discussed so far. The crowd was whipped up in a religious fervour as the Third Crusade was about to begin, and some of them were about to depart. In addition to this, the crowd was driven by rivalry for the luck of others, in quotes, some looking to finance their trip to the crusade whilst doing battle, in inverted commas, against the enemies of God before even leaving. The Jews were described as possessing monies equal to royal treasures, and the mob still made sure that the record of debts were destroyed, implying that there was still a sizable amount more to collect from them. The king was furious when he heard of such a massive loss to his personal treasury, and a violation of a guarantee of Jewish safety issued by him but a year earlier, which was clarifying that the Jews were protected by him. When I say that the Jews were the king's personal property, this is as opposed to being a subject of the Lord who happened to run the land that they were born on, as most people were. Most people weren't directly a subject of the king. They were by extension because their lord was loyal to the king, if you see what I mean. You would say, oh, my lord is something, who's a guy who lives reasonably close to you. But Jews were personally, constantly on the business of the king, so to speak. They're like a emissary of something, which was possibly necessary to stop them being pushed around too much or taken advantage of by their regional lord as opposed to the king, because they're such an asset. Although crusader preaching, crusader posting, must have contributed to tensions in certain time periods, the church at its highest echelons still opposed force being used against Jews. The Sicut Judaeus was a papal bull that was issued and began to be reissued by most popes when taking office in the 12th century, in what seems to be a climate of rising anti-Semitism. This papal bull was first issued by Pope Calixtus, clarifying the rights of Jews to live in Christian lands without forcible conversions or harm, and asserting that they should be treated equally under the law. The spirit of the Sicut was later eroded in the 13th century, as worries about Jewish corruption grew among churchmen. Conveniently for them, a caveat was included at the end of the first Sicut, which allowed space for radical action. The conclusion states that it applies only to such Jews as are not guilty of plotting to subvert the Christian faith. This speaks of a paranoia that would later lead to inquisitions, and allows a certain legal backing to events like this. The Disputation of Paris, also known as the Trial of the Talmud, took place in 1240 at the court of the King Louis IX of France. It followed the work of Nicholas Donin, a Jewish convert to Christianity, who translated the Talmud and pressed 35 charges against it to Pope Gregory IX by quoting a series of allegedly blasphemous passages about Jesus, Mary, or Christianity itself. 4 rabbis defended the Talmud against Donin's accusations. The Talmud is a Jewish sacred text, a book of law, that complements their other texts. As part of its evangelistic efforts, the Catholic Church sought to win the beliefs of Jews through debate. They had previously taken on the works of classical philosophers with Thomas Aquinas' work. Nicholas Donin represented the Christian side, a member of the Franciscan order and a Jewish convert to Christianity. He had translated the Talmud and pressed 35 charges against it, blah 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 blah, by quoting a series of allegedly blasphemous passages. He also selected injunctions of the Talmud, which he claimed permit Jews to kill non-Jews and to deceive Christians and break promises made to them without scruples. The Catholic Church had shown little interest in the Talmud until Donin presented his translation to Gregory IX. The Pope was surprised that the Jews relied on the book other than the Torah, which contained alleged blasphemies against Christianity. This lack of interest also characterized the French monarchy, which chiefly considered the Jews as a potential source of income before 1230. The terms of the disputation demanded that the 4 rabbis defend the Talmud against Donin's accusations that it contained blasphemies against the Christian religion, attacks on Christians themselves, blasphemies against God, and obscene folklore. The attacks on Christianity were from passages referring to Jesus and Mary. There is a passage, for example, of someone named Jesus who was sent to hell to be boiled in excrement for eternity. The rabbis denied that this was the Jesus of the Bible, stating, "Not every Louis born in France is king." Long story short, a commission of Christian theologians condemned the Talmud to be burned, and 24 carriage loads of Jewish religious manuscripts were set on fire in the streets of Paris in June 17th, 1244. The translation of the Talmud into French changed the Christian perception about Jews. Christians had viewed the Jews as the followers of the Old Testament who honoured the law of Moses and the prophets, but the Talmud's alleged blasphemies indicated that the Jewish understanding of the Old Testament differed from the Christian understanding. Louis IX stated that only skilled clerics could conduct a disputation with Jews, but that laymen should plunge a sword into those who speak ill of Christ. The trial of the Talmud in Paris in 1242, which began after previously unknown blasphemies against Christ were translated from a religious text, the Talmud, ended in confiscations and book burnings and added to this hysteria. The idea of Jewish subversion and plots was taken up by the Church, and the extreme blasphemies which were found inside the Talmud gave fuel to the fire of the already present folklore around the Jewish hatred of Christ, e.g. blood libel. What I'm saying with blood libel being evidence of hatred of Christ, well, supposed evidence. The idea was that they were recreating the crucifixion, so they would kill young boys because they were the most innocent, and they would recreate the crucifixion, essentially. And these extreme blasphemies include things like Mary, the Virgin Mary is actually a whore who was like raped, so Jesus is a rape baby. Jesus is like burning in a vat of feces in hell, something like that. It's really It's pretty gratuitous stuff. The decrees of the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215, issued by Pope Innocent III, included a passage condemning converts who practiced their old Jewish customs, revealing an anxiety around the secret rituals of Jews, which fueled the Torbato Corde. Torbato Corde. Torbato Corde. This papal bull, so whenever you hear papal bull, that just means that they've released like an edict that says that people should do something, gave license to investigate for secret Jewish rituals practiced by Christian Judaizers in 1267. So Judaizers are people who have converted to Christianity, but then secretly they're still a Jew, like behind closed doors, and they do these secret rituals that expose them as a Jew. Or it can even be a Christian who's secretly doing Jewish rituals for, like, I don't know, for their own benefit behind closed doors. As we can see, the Church began to mirror suspicion and superstition that we see from the common folk of the Middle Ages on Jews, despite the Sicut, which is the Sicut Judaeus, the papal bull that clarified that Jews were safe, essentially, from non-violence. Essentially, kind of like Augustine says, saying, like, you don't have to love them, but just leave them alone, kind of thing. And they're equal under the law. And you're not allowed to forcibly convert them as well. The Fourth Lateran Council also issued measures against Jews, charging large amounts of interest on loans, and required them to wear special items of clothing. This was aimed at crippling the large finances of Jews, which was a key reason for the kings of Christendom to continue their protection of them. So, yeah, I mean, once the finances of these people are crippled, then all the more likely that the kings are going to get tired of them, keeping them around. The clothing rules served to further ghettoise the Jewry, allowing for less Judaizing. This is the idea behind it, I'm saying. So they can't spread their secret Jewish rituals, which is the kind of idea right now. This requirement shows most plainly that the traditional message of equality under the law proclaimed by the Sicut had fallen, and that hostility towards the Jews had risen to a point where they had no real support other than that of their king. And of course the king is mainly just supporting them in most of these cases because they make him a tidy penny whenever he wants to. They could pretty mercilessly squeeze the Jews whenever they needed money as well. There's because the king is their protection. It's almost like a strange mafia relationship. I suppose the only way that they can exercise any power back would be to just leave, because then the king gets less money. So I guess that's the only thing that's making him want to temper the amount that he gets out of them. Anyway, Henry III, the King of England, was eventually moved to sanction the Jews. He refrained from ordering a confiscation of books after the trial of the Talmud in 1239, but he did react to the increasing suspicion that was growing at this time, partly because of the blasphemy that was found in the Talmud. He reacted to this with his Statute of Jewry. The bishops of Norwich and Lincoln had already prevented interaction of any sort between the two groups in their diocese, as well as enforcing badges for the Jews. So I'm saying Jews and Gentiles are these two groups. And many other bishops took similar actions during the reign of Henry III. English bishops, I'm talking about. Until Henry showed his sympathy and issued the statute, while also following the example of previous kings by protecting the Jews from violence. So he's giving a nugget to the bishops who are showing concern at what they see as this rising conspiracy, heretical heresy growing in the land. But he's still not going to allow any violence, and I guess he wants to keep this money still. Here we see a king who feels some responsibility for his personal subjects, but who is not immune from the influence of the church that was becoming hostile to the prosperity that made the Jews so valuable to the crown. Edward, Henry's heir, was a very pious man, a pilgrim and a crusader, influenced by the Dominican order, who tried zealously to convert Jews via preaching. He was surrounded by many bishops who were very anti-Jewish. The Archbishop of Canterbury, for example, under him, insisted upon the demolition of synagogues in London, and wrote a chastising letter to the Queen concerning her business transactions with Jews. Edward made no major escalations against the Jews, experimenting with integrating them into the class of craftsmen, but this kind of failed. I guess he was thinking another sort of urban class of people for them to integrate into, because it really seems at this point that it's the usury thing, as I mentioned at the start of the essay. It's usury that is the main problem here, and the wealth itself, as well as the otherness and the theological backing. It's all sort of working together into a soup of otherness that is creating hysteria. The Pope finally dealt a death blow to Anglo Jewry in 1286, addressing a papal bull to the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, explaining in strong and eloquent language a condemnation of the Jews of England. He begins, "We have heard that in England the deceitful and perfidious Jews have done unspeakable things," and speaks of the Talmud and blasphemies therein, Judaizing, fraternization between Jews and Christians, and even unblessed intercourse between them. Edward was too pious to ignore the Pope on such a matter. Having already experimented with integrating the Jews, he expelled them first from his holding of Gascony in France, as some kind of experiment, and then from England itself, totally. We can see in the expulsion itself the story of the Jews in England. The common folk opposed the Jews from the moment that they arrived on the Isle, and I would argue the very possibility of an expulsion depended on this, as the medieval government alone didn't really have the reach to enforce such a broad policy in every flippin' field and hedgerow of the land. This ill will stemmed from the direct opposition between their religious beliefs, the Jewish otherness of lifestyle, living in these walled communities and urban centres, and a jealousy of their wealth. The Church took a long time to become adversarial to the Jews, and I believe it's no coincidence that this happened during the Crusades. Not only because of the Crusader preaching, additionally the impact of the Islamic conquests on the worldview of the papacy. It's easy to say you're going to be tolerant of these people, even though you see them as morally inferior, like Augustine said. But once... I'm thinking that they're sort of grouping these monotheistic heretics together and saying, well, you know, if these people cause a threat to me, then, you know, it's a lot harder to be tolerant of them. You're going to start wanting to fight back, in your eyes. The trial of the Talmud was another major factor, supplying concrete evidence for the Jews' direct opposition to the Christian faith, and a continuing opposition, because of course we have all the goings-on in the Bible of the Jews wanting to reject Christianity and the history since then, but the trial of the Talmud was them finally translating that the whole time that they've been reading this book that had some pretty hardcore blasphemies in it, if you see what I mean. This, it's showing it concretely that there's an opposition carrying on, and an animosity. With these two dominoes already fallen, mere tax coin was not enough of a reason to allow a pious king to go against the wishes of his people and of his pope. And to give you another nugget to evidence the sort of grassroots desire for the expulsion, these people had to report to lots of different docks to be transported out of the country at this time. And one of the ferrymen that they hired was prosecuted because the non-violence was still guaranteed by the king at this point, by the way, even as they were being deported. And this guy got done for a bit of violence that he did, where he grounded his boat on a beach, made all of his occupants leave, and then just sort of rowed away on his boat. And the tide, it was a floodplain, and the tide came in and drowned all these people. And I think he said something like, ask Abraham to help you or something, as he was going away.
To you I will give the gilded sword that jingles from rings of gold, and strike with it in battle as you